Diddy really screwed up, and I'm not referring to his criminal trial, which has him sitting in prison right now, but it has to do with something that happened right before he got arrested. If you've seen the Netflix documentary about Diddy, Diddy The Reckoning, which 50 Cent produced, there's some footage there that had never been seen before. This is a photographer that Diddy hired.
There's a point in every high-pressure situation where things stop looking stable and start looking like they're slipping. Not slowly, not quietly, all at once. And that moment usually doesn't come from the outside. It comes from inside. Because when something connected to the core of the situation starts breaking.
To follow him around and document his life. That footage ended up going to 50 Cent and his production company, and it's kind of the centerpiece.
Sold to them.
Yes, was the centerpiece of the documentary. So watch this particular scene, because this is where a lot of people feel Diddy really screwed over someone that he should be very, very thankful.
The reality is Mark Agnifilo, the person with whom he was speaking, actually won the case for him. This is a huge betrayal. Look, Agnifilo, there is no way he isn't outraged that Diddy was secretly recording him, and this ends up in this Netflix documentary. Mark Garagos, who is my co-host on Two Angry Men, he's represented Diddy for years, and his daughter is part of the Agnifilo defense team. And he was involved in all of this. So in this past weekend's podcast, I pushed him to find out how Agnifilo really feels here. And Mark kind of skirted it some, but I think you get the sense.
Diddy knew that Mark was being recorded, but Diddy didn't tell Mark. Does Mark feel betrayed by Diddy?
I've not talked to Mark about it.
What do you think?
Would feel.
What do you think?
I will tell you, I'll just tell you, if it was me, I would be more than a little upset. I was more than a little upset when the client didn't know and I was being recorded. I mean, there was a while there where I was meeting clients under bridges, freeway bridges, because I was PTSD over it. So I think, as a lawyer, it is one of the most inviolate oaths that you take to protect the client confidentiality and the client privilege. So I don't know. I haven't talked to Mark, but if I were Mark, I would be out of my head.
Out of my head.
It's incredible. Diddy did two things here. Number one, he betrayed Mark Agnifilo, who, to your point, did so much for him. Obviously, without Mark Agnifilo, may very well be spending the rest of his life in prison. The second thing that he did is, by having a third party that's privy to the conversation, the videographer in this case standing there, there's no privilege, right? Diddy waived that entire privilege. Now, it didn't end up backfiring because it seems nobody knew about it until the end of trial. And what are you going to do at this point? So selfish.
Now, we should say that, remember, Diddy and his team were very upset when they found out that this footage was part of the documentary, and they tried to shut it down, but, you know,
the act of taping it is what
out.
is so
the
awful.
The act of taping it, right.
Without Agnifilo's
Diddy would
knowledge.
say that I didn't authorize that video going out, and the argument they've made is that he's the one who has the right, that he owns that footage. But
that's a copyright issue. That has nothing to do with the morality of the whole thing.
Yeah, the morality is clear. That what's unclear is what kind of a deal.
That's when everything changes. That's exactly what this feels like. Because the second the idea of legal support stepping away enters the conversation, the entire narrative shifts. Instantly. Now it's not just about the situation itself. It's about what's happening behind the situation. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because legal support isn't just support. It's structure. It's strategy. It's the thing that holds everything together when pressure starts building. So when that structure looks like it's weakening, even as a reported idea, it sends a signal. A loud one. A signal that something isn't stable. A signal that something might be going wrong internally. And people pick up on that immediately. Because they're not just hearing the words. They're reacting to what those words mean. Or what they think they mean. Now suddenly, the conversation changes. It's no longer just about what's happening in public. It's about what might be happening behind closed doors. What kind of pressure would lead to something like that?
I gotta say, this is awful that Diddy owes his life to Mark Agnifilo. literally his life, because he could have gotten life in prison were it not for Mark Agnifilo, his defense lawyer, who had a brilliant strategy. And Diddy screwed him over when he hired this videographer to chronicle his life without telling Mark Agnifilo that when Diddy and Mark were on the phone, this videographer was recording what Mark clearly expected to be an attorney-client privileged relationship. Now, it is true that the client holds that privilege, the lawyer doesn't, but Mark's clear expectation was that this was a private conversation. These were private conversations, and that he and Diddy could talk openly, and Mark could talk to Diddy not just as a client, but as a person, and tried to guide him in a time leading up to his arrest. And unbeknownst to Mark Agnifilo, Diddy has got this guy recording the conversation as he's sitting there saying, "You are screwing this up. You are messing up this case. We're losing." And knowing that that's on tape. And it's almost like he's performing for the camera and not telling Mark what's going on. And the really enraging part about it is that Mark Agnifilo won this case for Diddy with legal strategy. It wasn't just an accident that this jury that had heard all of this in the news before the trial voted not guilty on all the serious charges. It was Mark Agnifilo that did that. Yet Diddy secretly records this guy and embarrasses him. And yeah, you could say, well, Diddy never expected that it would end up being broadcast somewhere else. Well, okay, but Diddy was planning on using it, or he wouldn't have had it recorded in the first place. So it's just really, really unfair. And I know that in a way this sounds crazy, that I'm getting so upset about Diddy, and yet there's video of Diddy beating Cassie. Well, that's horrendous, but that doesn't mean you can't look at something else as well. And I just think, as a lawyer, I just think this is just so outrageous that he would do something like this, and not even understanding what Agnifilo's legal theory was. Because I will tell you that when we did our first documentary on Diddy, which was 8 months before the trial, Mark Agnifilo said to me on camera that he is going to tell this jury that this was a successful black man that prosecutors were trying to take down because they couldn't get into his bank accounts because they were clean, and he couldn't deal with tax. They couldn't deal with taxes because he wasn't committing tax fraud. So they go into his bedroom. And that's what Mark Agnifilo said 8 months before. And he goes into the trial and he essentially wins that argument. Whether you believe it or not, a jury that sat through the whole thing, they believed it, and ultimately they convicted him on this BS Mann Act thing. So Diddy won that case. And one of the reasons...
What kind of situation would cause that level of shift? And those questions? They don't stay quiet. They spread. Fast. Now let's talk about why this hits so hard. A situation that was already carrying weight suddenly gets another layer added to it. Not just external pressure, but internal movement. And internal movement? That's what people pay attention to. Because it feels real. It feels like something is actually happening beneath the surface. Even if the details aren't clear. Even if the full context isn't known. Even if the entire situation is being interpreted through fragments. The perception alone is enough. Now here comes the reaction. And it splits immediately. One side locks in without hesitation. This is bad. This shows things are falling apart. This means the situation is worse than we thought. No pause. No doubt. Just full acceptance of the most
video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy and go into rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
And we also heard about Combs' drug use multiple times during his federal criminal trial. One of the witnesses called by the prosecution was Brendan Paul. He was accused of essentially being a, quote, drug mule for Sean Combs. This was after his arrest at Miami Opa-locka Airport in 2024. It was on the same day that Combs' properties in Miami and Los Angeles were raided by Homeland Security. Paul was found to be in possession of cocaine and marijuana-laced candy. Now, at trial, he testified that Combs had not instructed him to bring drugs onto the plane. Claims that he had just forgotten the drugs were in his bag. But he testified that it was loyalty that kept him from telling police the drugs weren't his. And when asked on the stand about how he feels about Sean Combs, he said it's complicated. As part of a plea deal, the charge for having the marijuana candy was dropped. Paul entered a drug diversion program, which is often offered to first-time offenders, and he was given immunity in exchange for his testimony. So nothing he said at trial could be used against him as long as it was truthful. During his testimony, Paul had this exchange with a prosecutor, quote, "Mr. Paul, were you ever instructed to obtain drugs for Mr. Combs?" "I was." "Who instructed you to obtain drugs for Mr. Combs?" "He did himself or other assistants." "What types of drugs did you buy from Mr. Combs?" "Marijuana, 2C, cocaine, ketamine, ecstasy." And when asked to explain what 2C is, he said it's basically just ketamine and some Molly in powder form dyed pink for the aesthetic. Later, the prosecution asked, "How did you and other assistants obtain drugs for Mr. Combs?" Paul replied, "We would text the drug dealer, and then the drug dealer would come to either of the homes." Now, I have to mention this as we're talking about Combs behind bars. There is something that could jeopardize Combs' admission to a drug treatment program. Bad behavior. There has been some back and forth about infractions that Combs has allegedly committed. You know, TMZ reported that Combs was caught with homemade alcohol, something that Combs' team has adamantly denied. Now, CBS News reports that it has seen Bureau of Prisons documents that show Combs was part of a three-way call in November, something that is not allowed because of concerns about things like witness tampering or conducting criminal business from inside the prison. But Combs and his team apparently told prison officials that he was on a call with his attorney, who added one of his heads of communication to give the okay to a statement that they wanted to release. Combs also claims that no one told him about the regulations on the phone calls, and he never got the prison admission and orientation handbook. This is again according to CBS. But the paperwork allegedly contains a recommendation that Combs lose 90 days of phone and commissary privileges. It's unclear if that punishment actually happened. But Combs is keeping busy while he serves his sentence. Let's talk about that. So apparently he's gotten a job as a chaplain's assistant at Fort Dix. This is according to his publicist. A former commissioner told CBS News that it's one of the most wanted jobs in the institution. He gets to apparently work in a private office. There's air conditioning. He can eat food that's brought in for religious services. A corrections officer told the outlet that the chapel is one of the only places.
Extreme interpretation. Then you've got the other side pushing back just as hard, saying there's not enough information, that people are jumping to conclusions, that situations like this can be more complicated than they appear. And they're not wrong. Because without full details, everything sits in uncertainty. But here's the problem. Uncertainty doesn't spread. Certainty does. So the louder voices take over. The stronger opinions dominate. And the middle ground disappears. Now the situation isn't being analyzed calmly. It's being amplified. Pulled in different directions by people who are all working with incomplete information. That's what creates chaos. Because when everyone is building their own version of the story, there is no single story. Just noise. Now let's talk about the idea that's driving everything here. Crisis. Because the moment people label something as a crisis, it changes how they see everything connected to it. Every detail feels big.
That inmates can congregate freely, that assistants are allowed to prepare a call-out list which tells corrections officers who's allowed to leave their cells. Assistants could potentially add their friends to that list. But Combs is also apparently taking care of outside business from behind bars too. Yeah, just before Thanksgiving, his legal team alerted the court that Combs had paid the fines that he owed as part of his conviction and sentence. Quote, on October 16, 2025, this court entered an amended judgment imposing a $200 special assessment and a $500,000 fine to be paid in full not later than 60 days after the date of sentencing. We respectfully submit this letter to inform the court that Mr. Combs paid the fine and special assessment to the Southern District of New York cashier on November 24, 2025. We talk about Combs behind bars, we also have to talk about an appeal, because as Combs works to shave off as much of his sentence as he can with good behavior and completion of the intensive drug program, his attorneys are working to not only get him out of prison, but also get his conviction thrown out. October 22nd, Combs' legal team filed a criminal appeal on his behalf with the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. They requested an expedited appeal, hoping to get Combs out of prison as soon as possible. They provided the court with a proposed schedule and said the government had no objection. And I'll tell you what, on November 3rd, Circuit Judge Beth Robinson filed this order, quote, appellant moves to expedite the appeal on the following schedule. Appellant's opening brief and appendix due by December 23rd, 2025. The government's brief due by February 20th, 2026. Appellant's reply brief due by March 13th, 2026. And oral argument in April of 2026. It is hereby ordered that the motion is granted. Yeah, so we'll be on the lookout for that one as well. Okay, in the meantime, what do Combs' holidays look like now that he's in federal prison? Well, the multimillionaire won't be able to spend it like he used to, but there are special meals and activities that inmates can participate in. In fact, Combs apparently teamed up with an internal group called Bankroll Bosses to help organize and fund a special meal for his fellow inmates. According to a report from Us Weekly, the group volunteered to buy food from the prison's commissary, but they didn't just buy it. No, they reportedly spent 2 days preparing all of this food for these inmates. In all, the outlet reports that 1,000 inmates were served. Now, Combs gave this quote to Us Weekly through his spokesperson, quote, Thanksgiving to me is about making sure other people eat. Everybody misses their family. People get depressed during the holidays. We just wanted to come together as a family and do our own thing. Now, there's no word on what exactly Combs and other inmates purchased from the commissary to make this meal, but it is apparently a very nice gesture regardless. According to TMZ, the Christmas menu at Fort Dix includes a whole Cornish hen, mashed potatoes, cornbread dressing, mixed vegetables. But now I want to bring on a very special guest. Okay, so now I want to welcome back on prison consultant Justin Perpernian. I want to welcome back on not just because I love having Justin on, but Justin, you are now working with Sean Combs and his team while he's in prison. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Well, I've had a connection through a mutual friend with Sean for many years. And when you're in custody, when you're sitting in segregation, it can change you and you want to learn. So our mutual friend a while back sent him a book called Earning Freedom that was written by my friend, Michael Santos, who I met in prison, who mentored me. And Michael spent a year in segregation before he was convicted and served a long time in prison. So our friend thought that book could help him get through his own crisis. And when you're in prison, you relate to people who are enduring a similar crisis. So I was very encouraged when she sent the book and he read the book and said, I can't change what's happened.
Every development feels more serious. Every silence feels like it means something. And once that label sticks, it's hard to remove. Even if new information comes out later. Even if the situation turns out to be different than it seemed. That initial perception? It holds. That's the power of narrative. Now add in the timing. Because timing in situations like this is never neutral. If something like this is being talked about now, it means something shifted. Something reached a point where it couldn't stay contained anymore. And once it's out there, it spreads. Fast. Now reactions start stacking. One interpretation leads to another. One assumption leads to 10 more. And before anyone can slow it down and ask what's actually confirmed, the narrative is already running. That's where we are right now. A situation moving faster than clarity. Now think about the impact of that. Not just on the situation itself,
but I'd like to begin to use this experience as an opportunity to help people in prison. So through Prison Professors Charitable Corporation, which does work in every BOP prison, it does work in a lot of state facilities as well, he has begun to document and say, how can I use this experience as a way to help people? And the beauty of that is you read these interviews about people in prison, even people who have been in Fort Dix. We have other people in our community at Fort Dix. And the common refrain in prison is, it's boring. The days feel like Groundhog Day. It doesn't have to be, right? It can be incredibly productive, and you can get there by learning from other people and beginning to document the journey. So that's how the relationship began. And it's really an emphasis on using the experience productively, recognizing you can't change what led to this 15-month sentence right now, but he can change how he responds. And when you do that, you bring a lot of meaning to your own prison term. The days don't feel long and boring. And you also begin to help other people. And regardless of how you feel about Sean Combs, you can't deny that he has an ability to inspire and help other people. And he's beginning to do that on the inside. And I think that's wonderful. So I'll always be grateful our friend sent him a copy of Earning Freedom, and he went through it, and he's learning from it. He's implementing the strategies we teach.
What are some of the ways that he's helping? I mean, I mentioned before that he has this specific position as a chaplain's assistant, helped with Thanksgiving meals. What else is he doing to help his inmates?
So there are some people in prison who they just continue to play the victim. It's not their fault. They've been harmed. The prosecutor's looking to advance their career. Everyone has an agenda, and it would have been a shame, I expressed to the team, if he didn't use the experience to focus on the good that he can do. So how can he be of value to people? When a prisoner is getting ready for their release from prison, do you know what it's like before you go home from prison, Jesse? Do you know the anxiety someone faces? They're scared. Yeah, they're scared. You're a convicted felon. You've been debanked. You can't get a license. You might not be able to get housing. You might be unemployable. You don't have a documented record that shows why you're a candidate for a second chance. So clearly, given his business skill set, his success, rather than lament about the unfairness and blame everybody, he said, I'm here. I'm going to use the experience productively. Well, how do you do that? You do what he began to do before he got even sentenced to prison. And I think his lawyers did a good job of expressing to the judge how he used his time in detention at MDC well by mentoring other prisoners. What would you like to do when you come home? Well, how do you develop that? How do you build that? What relationships do you need? What education do you need to develop? Is there value in documenting that journey? So when you come home, you just don't tell someone, I've earned a second chance. People are going to say, I want to see it. Help me understand it. So as I came to say, and I had confirmation of this before our team began to guide him through the nonprofit, he's helping people understand how they can use their time productively. He's using his business skill set in mind to help people use their prison term more productively. And I think that's wonderful. And it gets in the way of this message of it's boring. There's nothing you can do in prison. It's complete. Right. It's not true. It can be a really incredible productive experience if you find perspective and recognize there's value you can provide.
No, I completely understand that. Did he give you, though, any indication about how he's doing there? Is he scared? Is he miserable? I mean, you talk about doing productive work, how it can make the days go by in a more positive way. But has he given you any indication about what his life is like there?
There's no way to spin that being in prison is difficult. Being in a low security prison is hard. Being separated from your family is difficult. And spending time in prison during the holidays is hard. That's hard for any federal prisoner. So certainly there are sad and down days, but I think there's been this shift, and I think it's helped.
But on perception. Because perception shapes everything that comes next. Once people start seeing a situation through a certain lens, that lens sticks. Even if new information comes out later. Even if details change. Even if the original interpretation turns out to be wrong. That first impression? It doesn't go away. That's the weight of moments like this. Now here's where things get even more unstable. The longer this stays unclear, the more people start filling in the blanks themselves. Not with facts, but with assumptions. With speculation. With narratives that feel real because they're repeated enough times. That's how stories grow beyond control. Not through confirmation, but through repetition. Now you've got multiple versions of the same situation circulating at once. One version says everything is collapsing. Another says everything is being exaggerated. Another says there's something deeper that hasn't come out yet. And all of those versions are moving at the same time. That's what makes this volatile. Because there's no single direction. Just multiple narratives colliding in real time. Now let's talk about control. Because control is what feels like it's slipping here. When everything is stable, the narrative is controlled. Statements are measured. Reactions are predictable. But when something like this hits, that control weakens. Because the conversation starts moving faster than anyone can manage. Faster than responses. Faster than clarification. Faster than correction. And once that happens, the story starts running on its own. That's where we are. A situation driven not by confirmed facts, but by momentum, by attention, by reaction. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. What you're really watching isn't just a legal issue. It's a shift. A shift from structure to instability. A shift from control to uncertainty. And that shift? That's what keeps people locked in. Because people want to understand what's happening. They want clarity. They want answers. But what they're getting instead is movement. Constant movement. New reactions. New interpretations. New layers being added to something that still doesn't have a clear conclusion. That's why this doesn't slow down. Because it hasn't reached resolution. It's still evolving. Still expanding. Still pulling in more attention every second it stays unresolved. Now the question everyone is asking, where does this go? Does it get clarified? Does it stabilize? Does it escalate even further? Right now, nobody knows. And that uncertainty? That's what's driving everything. Because as long as there's no clear answer, every possibility stays open. And open possibilities? They keep people watching. They keep people talking. They keep the entire situation alive. That's where this stands. Not confirmed. Not settled. Just growing. A narrative fueled by reaction, perception, and the powerful idea that something critical might be happening behind the scenes. And until that idea is either confirmed or shut down, this doesn't end. It doesn't slow down. It stays right here. At the center of attention. Because whether people believe it, doubt it, or question every part of it, they're still engaged. Still watching. Still trying to figure out what's really going on. And that's what keeps it alive. Not proof. Not certainty. Just the weight of a situation that feels like it's shifting in real time. And the possibility that it hasn't reached its breaking point yet.